Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Stronger Together Professional Network of HR Professionals, our webinar, our bi-weekly webinar. We appreciate you being here, and today's special guests, Kevin McNerny and Judith Fiddler. We appreciate all y'all being here with us this morning, and as always, questions you can ask in the chat. We'll get around to them as we move through the next 45 minutes to an hour. We try to keep these things under an hour, but we never know based on the questions that come in. So we're going to jump right on in. Today's topic is going to be interesting, I believe. One of the issues that we've noticed most in the past few months for HR professionals has been a lack of confidence. Can you imagine that? A lack of confidence with HR professionals. It's not surprising with new legislation flying about and rules changing right, left, and center, but this has always had an effect on the productivity of HR professionals and their confidence. However, short of being a bad thing, there are strong arguments to say this is a good thing. So it could be a good thing to have a lack of confidence. The fact that HR professionals are seeking advice and answers means that they aren't second guessing themselves, and that many of the mistakes made usually from bad or wrong information are being avoided. Because we do see a lot of times that HR professionals are a bit reluctant to ask a question because as an HR professional, they are supposed to know, well, let's be real, everything, which isn't possible. So one of the things that we've seen is this with our Stronger Together HR network is that more and more people are starting to ask questions, which is a good thing. We're here today with our esteemed panel, as I mentioned earlier, to look at these matters and question whether or not confidence is a necessary skill for a successful HR professional. And also, what does strength mean? What does it look like in an HR professional? Jude, I want to come to you first. Let's come and just ask you the question of confidence. What do you see as being the issue or problem surrounding confidence as an HR professional or in an HR professional?
Hi, yeah, good morning. Confidence is a really interesting concept for HR professionals. I don't think it's the same sort of concept that you have in the normal world. You can be very confident in normal life, but not necessarily confident in different processes when it comes to HR. And you can be confident in different levels of processes. You can be really good at, say, redundancies and not so good at 2Ps or not so good at gross misconduct termination. So confidence means different things. When you are a standalone generalist in HR, that can be a very lonely place. And that has a knock-on effect on your confidence. Typically, employees might not like you. They might think that you are the HR police. And typically, employers might not like you. They might think that you are a bit of a necessary evil. You're the blocker that's stopping them getting things done that they want to get done through the company. And so you're kind of in the middle, and you're supposed to be objective, and you're supposed to be making all these decisions, and you're supposed to be advising, and that can be a really lonely place. And when it comes to confidence, when you go into a meeting, if you are underconfident, then that is seen as you've lost control. You might not come over it, the way that you want to come across. And similarly, if you don't gauge it right and you're coming over as being too confident, then you're aggressive and you're putting up barriers. And we all know that it's emotion from an employee that makes them take it further, makes them appeal or go to tribunal. So if you're coming over as this aggressive person, then that's emotions are going to be high. So you're not doing your job properly either. It's about this balance then. So we know there's 3 levels of confidence. There's underconfidence, or we see this all the time. There's underconfidence, there's self-confidence, and then there's overconfidence. And underconfidence can be dangerous because HR managers end up with a kind of position which is their comfort level, which is they're not quite taking risks. They're being very risk averse because that's where they're comfortable. And then you've got this position which, if you're overconfident, you're making rash decisions and you're a bit of a loose cannon and you're just doing things. So I think I was up to, there's 3 levels of confidence. Did you get that? There's 3 levels of confidence. So under, over, and self-confident. And it's important that you are, they're dangerous. Underconfidence and overconfidence is dangerous. And self-confidence is where you don't second guess yourself, but you're proceeding with care. You're doing your own internal risk assessments. Is this right? Do I need to go and get help? Do I just need to go and just get a yes from someone that I'm on the right strategy, that I'm on the right lines? And we've noticed through our research and through doing this for so long, doing this with us 20 or so years, that the link between confidence and mistakes is really closely related. And we all know, we've spoken about it on here before, that there's two sorts of mistakes in HR. The first one is don't sweat the small stuff. Seriously, just get on with it. It's just not a problem. Don't worry about it. And the second one is what we call hanging offences. And part of the problem is not knowing the difference between these two sorts of mistakes. Someone came to me the other day and said, oh my God, I've done the worst thing in the world. I have paid the wrong amount for a redundancy and I can't sleep and I don't know what to do. I need to go and admit to my boss that I've done it wrong, and then I need to admit to the employee, and then there's going to be an unfair process and it's going to be appealed. No, that is a don't sweat the small stuff. You've got the calculation wrong, big deal, go back, correct it, pay them the right amount of money. It's not a big deal. But moving towards a termination or terminating someone too early when you don't have the right strategy, you haven't done the right investigations, you haven't done your process properly, that is a hanging offence, and that is what we need to be losing sleep over. And that is the sort of thing that is losing people confidence. And when you're in the top category of confidence, I'm saying it's underconfident, self-confident, overconfident. It's the only thing that changes people who are overly confident is when they make these massive mistakes and they come across someone like Kevin in tribunal who's, cross-examining their box saying, did you really think that was a good idea? Did you really think that, you didn't need to go through these investigations? Did you really think that you could make this decision on your own without, whatever it might be? Yes, sorry, yes. It's about knowing what your mistakes are, and then it's about monitoring your own confidence levels.
Yeah, okay. Kevin, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, please, Levy. I really like Judith's segmentation of confidence into those three segments. I hadn't really thought of it as having those three features, but just picking up on them: under, self, and overconfident. I guess most barristers, most employment lawyers will strike a lot of HR people as overconfident, and that can spill into being arrogant. I think the best confidence comes from that middle bit that Judith calls self-confidence. And you only get there really by, at this stage or this age, realizing that you will know some things very well, but crucially, you'll know an awful lot of things either very poorly or only the skim surface of those things. And understanding that about yourself, that you know some things very well and a lot not very well, I think can give you an inner steely confidence. So long as you know that you can improve your knowledge in those areas that you don't know by either looking at it yourself or crucially admitting that you need to go to other people, other experts, and learn from them. So Donald Rumsfeld gets a lot of grief for this very famous statement, but I think proper self-confidence comes from knowing what you don't know. And as long as you identify those areas and are able to say to yourself, well, I'm going to go and ask an expert, or I'm going to research it myself, accepting that you'll never know everything very well really instills proper self-confidence. And I think it's that middle bit that we're always aiming to get to.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think a lot of what we see, not just with HR professionals, we see it with barristers, we see it on, with other employment solicitors. And listen, you see it in people in general. We're picking on this group, but it's an overall blanket issue. Is that, it's the old adage. I don't know if they used it here in England, but I know in America they always said, the most stupid question you can ask is the one not asked.
Yeah.
And it's so true, because why are we so afraid to ask a question? It doesn't make us stupid. It doesn't make us really wrong. It actually shows not our vulnerability, but it shows our willingness to say, you know what? I have an idea in my head that's probably right, but let me get some input. Let me get some advice. Let me talk it through so that when I make that decision, that's not just affecting me, but more importantly, especially with HR professionals, is affecting somebody else's life in many cases. Why does it hurt to just get a little help?
I was going to say, sometimes it's just a yes. That's all you need. Am I on the right lines? And it's just a yes. And we've got so many people, even just inside of DLP, we've got people that go to other colleagues and they just want that yes. and then other colleagues that come to me and they just want that yes, and then I go to Kevin and I just want that yes, and then Kevin might go to his chambers, and we all need it all the time. And it just makes such a big difference when you get that, yep, you're on the right lines, or whatever it might be, just that little kind of confidence, that little confirmation that what you're doing is the right thing and it's the right strategy. It reduces your stress, it increases your confidence. It just means that you're better at your job. It's no one can do it on their own, really.
So yeah, I think it's a process. Just to give a parochial side to it. When you see me in court, you don't want me appearing not to know the answers. But before I get into court, I won't know the answers. And I'll be asking my WhatsApp group in chambers, what on earth is the level of statutory maternity pay this week? Or what on earth is the latest case on recruitment of disabled people? And it's that process, it's that curve that must finish at some point with some confidence. But let's not kid ourselves. The process is peppered with not knowing. And you need to move along that line to knowing. And for me, that process is about talking to other people who are more expert or going to the books.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Not knowing is fine. Guessing is where the problem is. Guessing is wrong. Yeah.
But we find so many HR professionals that do guess, and it's unfortunate. And when we're building a network for people to actually come to talk to, be willing to come and talk to us, to have a safe place for people to chat and communicate that helps them along the way. But anyway, if we're okay, let's move along. Kevin, I've got a couple of questions for you. I mean, as an employment law barrister, do you see confidence as being something necessary for a successful HR professional? We're talking about confidence, but specifically gearing in from a barrister to the HR professional.
Yeah, and I would add the adjective of quiet confidence. There is nothing funnier than seeing an arrogant barrister or solicitor start off trying to pull the wool over your eyes and then slowly but surely getting unpicked by a HR professional who knows the detail of the case, etc. So a quiet, steely confidence is important, but it must come from a place where you start out not requiring yourself to know everything all the time. So confidence is important, but don't fall for the arrogant, swaggering confidence that you see in a lot of lawyers.
Would you say that as an employment law barrister, that the majority of your cases come from HR professionals that are actually getting it wrong?
Well, we all make mistakes. I've definitely made mistakes in terms of advice and not knowing stuff. So I feel your pain if you do make mistakes. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it will come from HR giving bad advice, but I find the majority of HR professionals are stuck in the middle between management and staff. And time out of number, HR professionals have given the right advice, but the management, for one reason or another, have either ignored it or not implemented it properly. And it's management's executive actions that really fund my work. So knowing that HR professionals are giving advice in the background is often important in understanding why management have acted the way they do. But my experience is HR professionals, most of the time, get it right, but their advice is either ignored or not implemented properly.
Which is why I think the network and the objectives of the network are so important, because it's all about protecting the HR manager, which is exactly what you're talking about. They need to have their advice properly in writing that they can, fall back on. Properly protecting the business, which means they've explained it to their bosses, their management, in the correct way, that they understand what the risks are and the liability moving forward. And then also how to add value as a HR professional, which are the three objectives of Stronger Together. But I think you've hit on something really important there, that how as an organization do you then move forward with a tribunal knowing that HR manager is going to have to stand in the box and say, oh, actually, that was my advice, but they didn't follow it? How can you proceed without that person as a witness? just so the company needs to know that at an early stage when you're saying, this is my advice. If you choose not to accept it, that's fine, but I can't be a witness. Or I'd have to swear on oath that was my, what happened, what I said, what I gave you advice and you didn't want to take it. So basically, it's a losing case. It's an interesting scenario, but the other thing is this happens all the time.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned in a previous webinar, tribunals and practitioners have a lot of sympathy for HR people, especially, I suspect, a lot of people on this webinar who are the only HR person in that company. So the rest of us understand the piggy in the middle position that HR professionals are in. But we will want to see what their advice is, and we will want to draw a line between that and what actually happened. So they're often very relevant witnesses, I'm afraid.
It's interesting because what you're saying is, we did pick up we talked about it in our group at one point, is that the HR professional is giving advice or suggesting advice. Management isn't taking it, or they want them to do something else. So going back to this thing we're calling confidence, the HR professional in many cases, because of their potentially losing their job or putting themselves at risk, they don't have the confidence to stand up to management and say, hold on, wait, this is the way to go. And here's the reasons why. And you know what? If we don't do this, we're going to lose in tribunal. And ultimately, that's what we're shooting for, is not to lose in tribunal, to do the process right. And if the process is done right, then we don't lose.
Yeah.
That comes back to confidence.
Yeah. And it comes back to confidence.
It is. To be slightly melodramatic, a HR professional typically is speaking truth to power. And often those people get absolutely slammed. So creating confidence in those people, those pivotal people, is important. And it strikes me, if you're isolated within a company, the best way of doing that is networking and joining these sort of groups where you can share, as Levy says, in a safe space, your thoughts. I'm the other side of the coin. As a barrister going out on circuit on my own, it can feel quite lonely. And I know the joy of being able on WhatsApp now, or on these sort of meetings, of talking to other barristers, other solicitors, and doing my own network. I can't recommend enough an individual HR person networking outside of their group or employer.
I don't know if you've seen, there's a comment from Tracy who said that as a standalone HR person, she's expected to know everything. She's expected to have all the answers, and that the company is resistant to spend money on employment lawyers because they think that she's supposed to know all the answers. It's not necessarily a nice place to be, because that's not possible. Not one person knows anyone. I don't care who you are. You don't know all the answers.
And when it comes, like she's saying, they're reluctant to go to employment lawyers, but at the same time, you have to have that input in order to make informed decisions. It's those informed decisions that if you're uninformed, that's what gets you in trouble in tribunal. And then again, there's this vicious circle of the confidence to stand up. It's like you said, that you're standing up to a higher power in the organization many times, although the way I always see it is that the HR manager or the HR professional should be in many ways on a similar level, because they're making decisions inside of an organization that are vital many times to the output of the organization.
But let's face it, the reality is that that's not where HR doesn't have that value. That's why we need to be increasing the value of HR. And who really wants to stand up to their boss and go, no, you're wrong? Yeah. HR don't have that. They don't have that. They don't have that confidence. They don't have that ability.
Need a little American in them. That's all. If an employee, this is for you, Kevin, if an employee has corona anxiety caused by corona, is this furlough or sick leave?
Sick leave. It strikes me that that's not a qualifying condition for furlough. It would strike me that that's unfortunate, but it's going to be classed as sick leave.
Or we can say because the absence is caused by corona itself, because it's corona anxiety, that qualifies for furlough.
Do you think? Yeah. I mean, my initial view is it's classically going to be potentially an absence because of an illness, the anxiety?
Okay, well, no, I think it depends on. We get a lot of this. We get a lot of these questions, from all of our clients all of the time. And I think it has to come down to the situation, doesn't it? It has to come down to, can they work from home? If they've got corona anxiety, do you need to get an occupational health report potentially? Can they do some of their role but not others? Can they work in self-isolation? What sort of risk assessments have you done? How have you protected them? All of those sorts of things. But it's a really, really tough call to make, I think, because corona anxiety is caused by corona, therefore it would qualify for furlough. It's only because of COVID.
It's an interesting topic. Next question. Employee is late for work saying he has a sleep issue where he doesn't wake up. That sounds like my son. He is 10 minutes late approximately three times a week. Is this lazy employee or disability? How do we determine?
I think you've got to take some steps, but you'll probably end up seeing it as a try-on. But unless you take those steps, you leave yourself vulnerable. So check out whether it is a disability that he's relying upon. Try and flush out in writing why he says he's not getting up on time. And I suspect it'll all be complete bananas, but you need to take the steps. And if you're satisfied that there is no genuine disability at the back of this, then it's going to be met with a warning. And if he really does have a substantial case, then his appeal against that warning should flush it out in writing, and you can take it there. So take the necessary steps, but it's probably a try-on, isn't it?
I think this is the sort of perfect example of what we're talking about before, that we don't have knowledge in absolutely everything. And if you don't know, don't guess, don't assume, just go and speak to someone. And again, it really helps to have a network, that you've got occupational health advisors. You wouldn't necessarily want to go and do a report, but you'd want to go and say to someone, wait a second, is this, it sounds bananas. Is this okay? Or is this the best excuse ever for lateness? And it's about not guessing.
Why do you have to do a collective consultation when TUPEing one employee? If you have over 10 employees, is there any way around this?
So the same question's just come in from Reagan, actually. It's on the chat.
Okay.
Who's just asking, in a TUPE, if there's only one or two employees transferring, can we consult on an individual basis instead of going through reps? This is, it's one of these kind of issues in employment law that doesn't seem to make much sense. So normally when you're doing a collective consultation or a large redundancy with more than 20 people, you have to go and get employee reps. But in TUPE regulations, if you're transferring just one person, you have to go and get employee reps. So this was something, again, I'll hold my hands up, didn't necessarily know, I wasn't particularly aware of this until recently, but we've checked it out. This is, we need to be giving advice, proper advice. So it's something that we need to be checking out properly. It seems a bizarre rule. Kevin, I don't know if you've ever come across it, but we've got a client situation at the moment where one of our clients doesn't want to go and get employee reps because it's just affecting one person. They're quite a large organisation, say 50, 60 members of staff. And one person's TUPEing, it's actually going back into a council situation. They're retaking back a tender, and they don't want to go and get employee reps. Yeah,
it is overkill to a massive degree, but you use the word, Judith, that unlocks why in more normal circumstances you have to carry out this sort of consultation. And that word is effect. It's the effect on other people who might not necessarily be TUPEing. That's what the legislation tries to capture. It's very touchy-feely continental European legislation, and they want workers involved. So even though there's only one person transferring, the legislation tries to make sure that any effect on anyone else who isn't transferring is discussed and consulted upon. So it's the effect, possible effect, on non-transferring employees, which causes consultation even when you've only got one employee transferring.
But there wouldn't be any obligation to consult with anyone else. You'd only be consulting with the actual person that was moving.
Not necessarily. If there was an effect beyond the one individual who was transferring, then the consultation could be widened out.
So who and how would you know? What would be the test for that? That's
you interestingly said that the TUPE transfer only affects one employee, i.e. the person who's transferring. If that's the case, then the consultation would be narrowed to, in essence, him or her. But if, for example, one employee was transferring, but that transfer of itself affected others who were staying with the employer, then the consultation could spread out to those affected. Say, for example, someone who was leaving meant a massive increase in workload on the others, then the consultation could be spread out to the others.
And of course, when you're employing employee reps, you have to allow those who are affected by the transfer to be an employee rep.
Yeah. I suppose I'm just putting a marker down for effect, not simply being they leave one employer and go to another. The effect could be on those who stay at the ranch, really.
So Rachel added in there that she just read that if you have to consult with a wider team if you're incoming, but not if you're outgoing.
I'd have to check that. I would have thought the effect provision applies to the transferor's staff as well as the transferee.
If I have paid some employees for self-isolating a few weeks ago, do I now have to do this for others? I don't want to pay anyone as there are now more employees off.
My short answer is there's no need to pay people their normal wages, subject to checking the contract rigorously if they're self-isolating. The short answer is if they're self-isolating, what they might be entitled to is statutory sick pay. But in essence, unless the contract says you will get paid for this, you're not on the hook. However, if you've already paid other people, there's a very weak argument, I would suggest, that you've established a custom or a practice. That would be a weak argument. But if you had a Bolshe union rep on the other side, they would say, well, hold on, you've just established this practice. You're now stopping it. And my answer to that would be, well, that's potentially the case, but you've got to look at the reason why we're stopping it. And it's because of the financial circumstances of the company. Now, if that is the case, and it's not tainted by discrimination, for example, you paid a lot of people when they were on furlough because it was part-time, or they were females, as long as it's not tainted by discrimination, I think you're on the hook for statutory sick pay, but nothing else. What do you think, Judith?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think this is happening a lot because when people first started to go off, it was one person here, one person there, and they were trying to do, employees were trying to do the right thing and pay them. But now it tends to be a lot more people, and it's got a lot more serious, and they just simply can't afford it. So I think, yes, if you're changing your principles, as we call them, if you're changing your policy as an employer, I think it's important that you let that be known even before people go off. So you just maybe send out a memo, look, this is where we are, this is what we've decided, this is why, explain and justify. Like you say, we can't afford it. So this is what we're doing going forward, and making sure that it affects everybody. So don't just pick and choose different areas, different departments, different status within the business. Make sure it's everybody. But I don't think, I agree with you, it's not yet customer practice, but this will just help to make sure that the change is known about even before people go off.
And just to grasp the nettle a bit, it may well have been that in the early days, the company could afford for 2.5 employees to go off and be paid. But now the situation changed and we cannot afford it. To say that expressly, in the past we could afford it, we could bear that cost, but now we can't. And I think you should be okay. I mean, given the timeframes you're dealing with, having paid some people for a shortish period of time, it's going to be the devil's own work to establish that as custom and practice for everyone else who follows.
Should I treat them differently when it comes to working from home? There are business reasons for them to be office-based, but they want to work from home.
Yeah, first of all, with any pregnant employee, you really need big asbestos gloves because it can be very expensive if you get it wrong. Let's just take it a bit by bit. Well, first of all, a pregnant employee, you want to do a risk assessment if they're at home. I know it sounds overkill, But if they're now working from home, or they want to work from home, or you think it's feasible, do a risk assessment, because every pregnancy claim will start off saying they didn't do a risk assessment. So do that, cover that base. The question then goes on to say there are business reasons for them to work from the office. Good. Set that out in writing, tell them what they are, and they don't want to. Well, up to a point, hard lines. If you need them in the office and their pregnancy via the risk assessment doesn't preclude them from working in the office, then they don't get to do exactly what they want to, is my blunt advice. But you need to take all those steps, the risk assessment, setting out why they need to work in the office and why working from home won't do. You need an audit trail for all of those decisions. Otherwise, it could be a bad day at the office.
I want to throw in there, I mean, again, kind of going back to this whole idea of confidence, you can sit and talk about this stuff and, each question that's coming in, and even though an HR manager, an HR professional has a lot of this knowledge along the way, I mean, I can't just imagine with all these different questions that are being fired that he would want to, again, have a place or to be able to check in on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're getting it right. Because there's so many things we tell our people all the time, begin with the end in mind, end being tribunal. I'm getting ready. I'm going to go open my mouth to an employee. First thing that I always think in my head is, before I even open my mouth, well, maybe not me, because again, my Americanisms, I just slip it out sometimes. But, before I open my mouth, I need to think that if I say it wrong, if I do something wrong, it all starts with that first conversation, because I could say something there that triggers the issue that all of a sudden ends me up in tribunal. And to have the confidence to walk into those meetings sometimes, even though I might have done 100 or 1,000, or for that matter, tens of thousands of disciplinaries or grievances or, returns to work or whatever the situation might be, everyone is a little bit different. And the person on the other sides, their emotions are different. The way they feel is different. And if you just say it wrong, you get something wrong. The tone, the tempo, the pace, the volume that you address it sometimes triggers this whole spiral effect that ends you up in tribunal. You don't think about it right then, but 6 months down the road or a year down the road, you're sitting in tribunal having to defend what you said in that initial meeting. So It just, it's triggering all this in me. And I'm just thinking it's just so important to make sure that you're communicating along the way and to keep and withhold that confidence, that self-confidence.
It's actually an interesting point from what you're saying, but there was journals that have just been released in the last couple of weeks that have said about pregnant people, going back to the question, that they're more vulnerable the more pregnant you are. So the later you are in your pregnancy, the more likely, the more your employer should be allowing you to self-isolate or to be at home. So it's things like that HR professionals just don't necessarily know. We need to be up to date with all these journals. So it's ever-changing information that we need to be aware of.
Here's a really interesting question coming up with kind of what we were talking about in the beginning. Can I furlough all my staff to cover annual Christmas close down between Christmas and New Year's?
I'd like to know what Kevin thinks about this. I think it's a really cheeky question. I think, as far as I'm aware, the legislation allows for it, but it's clearly not in the spirit of furlough. And I think we should all be a bit mindful of the fact that from December, those who are going to be on furlough are going to be publicly, not named and shamed, but there's going to be a public list from HMRC of the names of those who are furloughed. The hope is that more people can be able to whistleblow or find out what your employer is actually really claiming for. There'll be more furlough fraud coming out. So I think you need to be a bit mindful of things like that. And I think claiming for holidays or a 2-week shutdown or December being quiet, I think there's a lot of companies doing it with or without their employees' consent or permission or knowledge. I think it's going to be a very interesting time. As I say, my knowledge is a lot of people are doing it, and I don't necessarily think it's in the spirit of furlough. Very tempting for employers, and it's in the spirit of the act. I don't know, Kevin, what are your thoughts?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it is possible, but as a taxpayer, I'm not too sure it is in the spirit of the scheme. So I completely agree.
Us taxpayers are going to get ringed for all this one day. So Might as well get used to it. Can I furlough staff for any holiday leave? They have November to the end of March. If not, why not? And if no one is picking up their work, so no one's actually picking up their work. So
I think that's the same. I think it's the same as the Christmas leave, really. Again, I know a lot of employers who are doing this. They're covering holidays with furlough pay so that the employer isn't having to pay for the holidays. You might say, if you're being cynical, you might say that this legislation wasn't necessarily that well thought out.
Well, absolutely, Judith. I think the first furlough legislation went through 5 series of amendments. So I would put a big marker down for when you try to do this with the holiday leave next year. I think the question's talking about, you really need to check at that stage what the latest version of this new furlough scheme is, because it will change. I'm pretty certain it will change.
How can you even begin to have confidence in this system? You know, the writing of the rules are changing constantly. We don't even know what's going on today. Here's furlough. All of a sudden, put everybody on furlough, but the regulation around furlough is constantly changing.
I think that's a little hard. I think in some ways it has to. Didn't Rishi Sunak say right at the beginning, don't throw out the good in pursuit of the perfection or something? It had to come in pretty quickly. And I think they had to kind of get something in place, and then they have to work out the tweaks as it goes along. But I mean, 6 months is a long time to be working out the tweaks.
But how can you make somebody wrong when you're telling them to do something, and then you're going back and saying, "Hold on, wait, no, it's not in the fine print."
Yeah, I mean, it comes back in a circular way to confidence. All I would say is you're probably going to make mistakes in the application of the furlough scheme. But as long as you do it with a genuine intent to try and comply with it, then you're not going to get a big stick at some point. You might have to pay some money back. But as long as you're doing it with the best of intentions, making a mistake or not getting absolutely everything right with this new furlough scheme is not going to open you up to a massive liability. My experience of HMRC is, so long as you are clearly acting with the best of intents to try and comply with the furlough scheme, they'll take a relaxed attitude to when you've fallen foul of it. I am increasingly getting a lot of cases where people have done the opposite and tried to turn over the HMRC. So that's just a postcard from the front, really. A lot of people are trying to turn over HMRC and not with good intentions, misuse the furlough scheme.
I think there's going to be a lot more of those cases coming out. Really interesting.
Yeah.
And especially now it's going public from December.
Yeah.
Can I object to my furloughed employee being named or published by the HMRC? I don't want my recruitment consultants named, or for anyone to know how big the business is for fear of headhunting.
I don't know that you can object. I think is it just statutory. If you're claiming furlough, then that's just part of furlough now. You go on the list.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have a word with HMRC because it's clearly a business threat, but I couldn't see that you have any facility for anonymizing any aspect of furlough or this new furlough scheme. But, talk to HMRC and see if they can come to an arrangement.
Oh, they can't come to arrangement for some and not for others, surely. Can you imagine chaos?
I mean, this question seems to be a cry from the heart because it could be a very significant business threat.
So I'm being devil's advocate, but wouldn't the answer be, well, if it's that important to you, don't claim furlough?
Well, yeah, but presumably they've got a business case that the work is such that they need to furlough staff or they will be being dismissed. I'm presuming there's a big downturn in work, hence the need for furlough. All I'm suggesting...
Have a Christmas pay. Don't know. And it's all the staff. And it's trying to get out of whistleblowing. You just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many moving parts.
But I mean, all I can say is ask. I don't fancy your chances, but it may well be that if we gave a convincing case that these people will be poached and your business will go south, they might come to an arrangement. But I think Judith's right. I couldn't see anything in the scheme allowing for anonymizing any part of the application. HMRC come to sweetheart deals with Amazon, all sorts of shenanigans. So
that's true.
We won't get into that on this one. I'll leave my political thoughts to the side. I need to make redundancies at the end of the year. Can't claim furlough for notice from December. If I do it now, I save money and can get casual workers to cover December as on less pay per hour. Is this allowed?
I'm just going to look at the second part of that question, which seems to suggest that you're replacing the redundant workers, clearly on less money and stuff, but that might jeopardize the redundancy process. So I'd watch out for that.
Yes, because the need to save money for 1 month isn't going to justify you making a redundancy early.
Yeah.
Which is going to be the issue there, yes.
It is legal to reduce hours for employees before making them redundant to reduce cost of redundancy and notice.
So many companies are doing this. So say you've got someone who's a full-time worker on 37 hours a week or something, and you know that there's going to be redundancy coming in the next 6 months. And what you start to do is you start to reduce their hours. So they go from 36 to maybe 30 to maybe 24 seems to be the trend. And then when you're making them redundant, even if they've been with you for 10 years, when you're making them redundant, their last pay packet for the last month or whatever has been on 24 hours. So their notice is reduced and their redundancy is reduced. So I suppose the question is there anything you can do about it? If you've been, for 9.5 years or whatever, you've been 37.5-hour week, and then the employer has just done this right at the end just to be able to reduce their liability when it comes to notice and redundancy.
Well, just looking at it from an employee perspective, any reduction in hours or pay has to be agreed to.
Agreed to.
So if an employee was not happy with the reduction and could see what was coming, i.e. redundancy on much less pay, then they could say, well, hold on, no, I'm now redundant. It's on this basis, on these hours and this pay that you need to make me redundant. I know what you're doing. Stop it. And if they say no, then you could resign and claim it's actually a redundancy situation.
But if you're being asked to agree the lower hours because it's to prevent a redundancy, then the likelihood is, in the most cases that I've been involved in, you are going to agree to that.
Absolutely. And if you agree to it, then you're going to be agreeing to a reduced redundancy package at the end.
This to me is one of those situations, that upper management would come and talk to an HR professional and say, hey, I want to cut the hours because we're getting ready to make people redundant. Go and have these conversations with your employees. And that's, again, where this confidence comes in and many times puts the HR professional in an awkward position. They know that it can't be done. Management knows that it most likely can't be done, but they're trying it on, and it puts the party in an awkward position.
I mean that's a real world example, isn't it? Of what we've talked about of a HR right in the middle of the crossfire. Yeah,
it's like this one. The next one is, can I keep my business open if we can't work from home? The answer to that, to me, it says yes. And if a person has to be able to work, if you can work from home and where and when is possible. Seems to be.
Yeah, I agree. My note said it, as long as the workplace is COVID safe, then you can keep the business open and there's no obligation to work from home. If you can establish a COVID safe workplace, then you can require staff to turn up at that COVID safe workplace.
And that means doing your risk assessments, making sure you've got your policy in place, having welfare meetings, making sure you've got your rotas, your PPE, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And evidence that we've got all that.
Good. Here's an interesting question that I think we see from time to time. What duties does an employer have if they feel an employee is being abused at home?
My starting point is as of now, the working from home aspect means that the home is a workplace. Yeah. If you're allowing your staff to work from home, that's a workplace as much as the traditional bricks and mortar of your business. So you have to do the risk assessment. So I looked at this question and asked myself, if a member of staff was being assaulted in my workplace, what would my duties be? Well, they're pretty extensive. I'd have to inform the police. I'd have to make sure that person was never again or removed, as it were. So just because it happens in the home doesn't mean the duties are any different than if it had taken place at the traditional site.
It's interesting.
Very, very hard to deal with, to be fair. Very sad, very hard. I suppose the answer has to include that you have to have your normal helplines in place, do welfare meetings, all that sort of stuff. If it would help the person that you can bring them back into the office, maybe if they are working from home, that might help. Just be supportive and understanding, and be a good, responsible employer. But yes, you're right. There's lots of rules now about how to behave with your employees who are basically at home, because your home is the office and your duties are still there. As
employers, we have a whole new duty of care as well for the worker working from home.
Yes. How do you know that person's home that you can't go into is safe for them to work in, but it's your responsibility to make sure it is, even though you can't get in there, you don't even know what it looks like or feels like, or, that they're working in the proper way.
Yeah, I mean, that puts it very well, Judith, that conflict between it's now a workplace, but you've got no right to be in there.
But then, if we look down the road, kind of if you had a crystal ball, you're going to have a lot of people in a year or so from now that are going to be complaining about health issues, and they've been working from their bed and slouched over. They don't have the proper setups. It's true. You just start to project into the future. There's going to be a lot of things that are starting to come up from these working at home moments that we're not seeing and not thinking about today.
Oh, for sure. In the future, claims will say they didn't carry out a risk assessment when I was working from home.
It'll be the magic 2020, isn't it? It all went right. It all comes back from 2020, the magic 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to run through a couple. I know I'm going to be conscious of the time here, so we're going to run through 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll get to what I call my favorite part, which is the top 5 tips of the week. If an employee has to go home to look after a child sent home from school and don't have holiday left or don't want to take holiday, is this furlough or emergency leave? Both of you, either one, quickly.
For me, it's going to be emergency leave. But if the adult has to self-isolate, which more often than not they do, then they'll be able to get SSP from day one. But otherwise, I don't think it's going to be emergency leave, which is unpaid.
Absolutely.
Okay. Are employers liable for employees getting drunk at virtual work Christmas parties if they hurt themselves or cause damage? It's a good question.
When I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking absolutely not. Don't be so ridiculous. But actually, the more you think about it, the more. All the case law on these sorts of things is all about: did the employer pay for the party?
Yeah.
Have they funded it? Have they put the proper rules in place? Have they made sure? Have they risk assessed? Have they done what they need to do reasonably? So the more you start to think about it, if people are goading people, or they're pushing each other to do stupid things or drink more, or there could potentially be a liability. It's worth thinking about.
I think it's like you said a moment ago, Kevin. It's at the end of the day, the home is now an extension of the workplace.
Yes,
it is, and Judith's right about a possibility.
It's a small possibility, I think.
It's often when I do training, I produce case scenarios and say, how could you make this a liability for the employer? And just kicking around this scenario, say the employer sets up a Zoom meeting. Say the employer sends a bottle or 2 of wine to each of those people on the Zoom meeting in preparation for the meeting. That could potentially create a liability where it otherwise wouldn't. So say the employer just simply says, we're all going to meet for a Christmas chat and that's it. No liability. But if the employer funds drinking at that Zoom meeting, then going back to what Judith said, the case law seems to suggest if you're paying for a site, if you're paying for booze and you're inviting, you're liable, even though it's in the writ.
It's bizarre, but yes. Someone in their own home getting drunk and trashing their own, whatever it might be, their own house, it could be liable for.
It's just a Friday night in our house.
Yeah.
If employees aren't allowed into work, can they be asked to come in to pick up their Christmas present? If we give a turkey every year, and if they pop in to pick up that gift, can they have a Christmas drink at the same time? Not party or gathering, but just 5 minutes when they are there to kind of pop in and to pick up their present.
I think this has to be a management decision in each and every case. It's going to be a decision for each individual office. If you want a quick cheeky drink with someone who's coming in to get a turkey, is that working? Are you going to work? Are they popping in? Is it socializing? If it's one person here, if it's a party, don't do it. But I think otherwise, I think you have to use your discretion. I think you have to use you have to be a responsible employer. But I think you have to use your discretion.
Just to be conscious of time, we will take other questions as they come along if there's anything else. But we want to wrap up here with our what I call my favorite part, the top 5 tips. And Jude, let's go to you first. What are your top 5 tips based on our topic this week?
Based on today and just everything we've spoken about. Okay, so my number 1 is going to be that you should risk assess your own confidence. You should risk assess your own confident decisions. So just before you make a decision, especially if it's a hanging offence, just to kind of go through, am I doing the right thing? How do I know it's the right thing? Do I need to check it out with anybody? It would be the first thing. Number 2 is learn from your mistakes. I think that's how you get from being underconfident to being self-confident, is learning and developing, growing, which is really important for all of us to do. Number 3 is going to be accept your mistakes and don't hide from them. We all make them. It's just part of life. Just accept it and don't hide them, don't bury them. Number 4 is having somewhere to go. I think that's really important. Just have somebody that you trust, that's a HR professional that knows what the difference between good and bad looks like. And then lastly is going to be, and I usually say this, I'm sorry, I'm boring, but it's going to be it's always my tip. My last tip is to put yourself in the shoes of the employee. You can try and be objective. You can try and be independent as a HR professional, and that's great. And it sounds wonderful, but it's really hard to do. The trick, I think, is putting yourself into the shoes of the employee. How would they feel? If I was them, what would I be looking at? How would I be annoyed? What would I want to see you doing in this situation? And I think that's kind of the magic positioning almost that helps in most situations.
Okay, thank you very much. Kevin, your top tips for the week.
Yeah, number 1 is acknowledge you can't be an expert in all areas. You should have 1 or 2 areas where people will say they're really good on that. But after that, just be confident in the fact that all of us can't be great at everything or even know a lot about everything. So just be quietly confident that no one knows everything, as it were. Secondly is don't suffer in silence. If you are that one individual HR manager in a small to medium-sized business, establish a network, even if it's just a couple of people on WhatsApp who you really, really trust, or other networks, more formal networks. Have an outside vent rather than just turning up at the one work site where you're employed and you always being piggy in the middle with no one else to sound things off. So get yourself a network, as it were. Thirdly is when your manager or whoever is leaning on you for advice, try and summarize what you're being asked in 1 or at the very most 2 sentences. Try and frame what that individual is asking your advice on. Often they'll not be able to do it themselves, but if your advice is to be of any use, you need to frame precisely what you're being asked about. So it strikes me 2 sentences at the very most on that. My 4th tip is get yourself some cover for any advice. And the way you do that is a short note. It doesn't need to see the light of day, but just do a note at the same time as you're giving the advice, no more than half a page, and what your advice was and why you gave it. And if you can do that the same day, that's really powerful when it comes to tribunal, because the cliche question from someone like me is, when did you make this note of your advice? And if it's miles away from when you gave it, it has less currency, really. My 5th tip is try and enjoy giving advice. It's a privileged position. People rely on your words, and try and own what sometimes can be an enjoyable experience. You're, on occasion, the expert in the room, and people rely on that advice. And that should be an enjoyable experience. So try and enjoy it.
Okay. Thank you very much. I've got a couple of real quick. My tips are be confident. Don't be afraid. Second, confidence comes with asking questions and learning. Don't ever be afraid to stop learning. Or don't ever be afraid to continue learning. Never stop learning. We are in a field and in an environment that is constantly and always changing. And it's important to make sure that you as an individual, especially the HR professional, aren't overconfident, that you're willing to say, you know what, I don't know something, or I know it, but I want to just double check it. Because that little bit of extra help, that little bit of extra confidence brings it to the point to where you're more likely to get it right and not get yourself in trouble. So along the journey, never be afraid to ask. And, hopefully we will continue to bring you more and more information, and you'll join part of our network. And that'll be a place that you can come and get more and more information and confidence along the way. Kevin, Judith, I'd like to thank you for being here. everybody that's been here, all of our audience today, thank you for joining us. Our next webinar is the 7th of December, so Monday, the 7th of December, with our special guest, Kathy Daniels. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and remember, confidence is the key.